I'm going to show to you on the screen there now what the final clarified principles contained. And what I then want to suggest is I think it was December 2011 or January 2012, a decision was adopted on AU level in Addis to follow this REC approach, this tripartite approach, as the model for the Continental FTA. I want to suggest that that enthusiastic support for this model was based probably on a belief that the signals contained in the first communique of Kampala would constitute the substance. We're going to do something about overlapping membership, trade facilitation. In other words, market access, opening up, yes, but integrating into a single FTA. At least that is how it was reported and it was supported. The reality is different, ladies and gentlemen. Let's look very quickly at the at only the clarified principles. Okay, I'm going to take you through these clarified principles very quickly. Okay, that was the first one. The negotiators shall be REC and or member partner state driven. And the clarification says this is taken to mean that member states, partner states can either negotiate as blocks or individual countries. Now, only a customs union really will negotiate as a block, but it will make sense if you're already in a regional arrangement that you will bring the two song books together so that your song sings to the two songs go along the same direction at least. But the important point to make is the parties to the tripartite will be states, individual states, not RECs, not secretariats. Very important. And the qualification, the entry into force clause in this agreement says a simple majority must ratify it and then it will enter into force. In other words, if X number of countries from these 26 decide not to become parties, perfectly in order, they can do so. As a matter of fact, that individual decision by country X, whether to join the tripartite or not, will depend on whether it will benefit it. So let's see whether it will benefit. And the same applies to all trade agreements, continental, regional, tripartite, all of them. Will it benefit me? Next one, variable geometry. I hinted that I will introduce this one to you. Variable geometry means the principle of flexibility which allows progression and cooperation among member partner states in a variety of areas at different speeds. The tripartite free trade agreement will allow the coexistence of different trade arrangements which have been applied within COMESA, EEC, and SADC, and any trading arrangements that may be reached during the negotiations. The principles of variable geometry, reciprocity, and acquis are complementary. What does that mean? It foresees a practical approach to the negotiations with different outcomes. The willing parties can come to their own deals and own agreements, and they will continue to exist with the existing ones. That is not solving the problem of overlapping membership.
Gerhard, say something about the acquis.
The acquis I will say something about. Thank you, Trudi.
Please.
Flexibility, special and differential treatment. Just note, ladies and gentlemen, that special and differential treatment is not automatic in the tripartite. S&D would be considered during the negotiations. So there is no automatic special built-in treatment or positive treatment here for the developing countries or the LDCs. Transparency is emphasized, but it's transparency about technical information of your trade policy and tariff books, not transparency for us, the public, to go and join and find out what's going on. Building on the acquis of the existing RECs in terms of consolidating tariff liberalization in each REC FTA. Let's look at that one and then we can conclude there are some others as well. Acquis is a French term. By the way, do you find the term acquis in the SADC Trade Protocol? Or commerce? No, but it's become part of our vocabulary now. Acquis is a French term meaning that which has been agreed. In the context of the Tripartite Free Trade Agreement, it means that the negotiation should start from the point at which I've taken it literally, so that's how it stands. Commerce says that trade negotiations have reached. Tariff negotiations and the exchange of tariff concessions would be among member partner states of the Tripartite that currently have no preferential arrangements in place between them. That is why the tariff offers have been made between individual countries that presently are not party to the same FTAs. You see tariff offers between South Africa and Kenya, South Africa and Egypt and others. But if they make these offers to each other and they agree on the schedules and they come to a conclusion, what have they created? A bilateral FTA or a trilateral FTA, an additional one, which can coexist in terms of the variable geometry principle with what we presently have. Just remember that that will take care in the agreement of the tariff component. Now you have all the additional disciplines of a trade agreement. There must be a chapter and rules on rules of origin, TBTs, trade facilitation, trade remedies, dispute settlement, etc. It must all be there. Have I answered you, ma'am?
Yes, this is extremely important because it does mean that we have diverted substantively from the vision of 2008 of creating a comprehensive, coherent, single trade regime, particularly for trade in goods in this instance. I would like to ask Paul or anyone else who's been involved in these negotiations, why have these negotiations taken so long? We've started with the traditional approach, with the trade and goods agenda. We've started with the tariff negotiations. Why has it taken so long? Because this is going to be extremely important for the Continental FTA negotiations, and why I would like to suggest that we start somewhere else in those negotiations, not with the traditional trade and goods agenda, and in particular not with tariffs, because it seems to me this is where we get stuck. Paul, what has happened? Or someone else who would like to share with us what has happened.
No, I'm not. I didn't really follow.
Why has it taken so long? Why are we still stuck with these negotiations? We haven't made a lot of progress.
We're not necessarily stuck.
Okay, we're not stuck, but we're taking a long time. We're not really stuck
because the actual negotiations just started almost a year ago. It took too much time, what they called a preparatory process.
What is that?
But the preparatory process turned into the negotiations before actual negotiations. The principles, all those things that Prof mentioned, even just to define variable geometry, and you know how it's defined now. It took long because probably member states or certain member states, they wanted already to influence the outcome of the Tripartite FTA, the way suiting their national interests. So it's really the preparatory phase that took long to agree on those issues, like the principles, the negotiating modalities, and what have you. But also, I think you are dealing with people who maybe our capacity to negotiate, focusing on trade in goods, we have created negotiators whose job is that. And some of these things have been at the WTO, and they come influenced by the WTO baggage as well. That whatever they talk, sometimes it doesn't really make sense for the region. It's like you are at the WTO. That is also an issue. But one issue to also maybe, personally, and I agree with you whether tariff liberalization is an issue anymore. And that's why we can reach probably an agreement. If we can reach an agreement on trade in goods, fine, this year. But I don't think it will mean anything to the traders and investors. Because as you could see, unless the other components, maybe your trade facilitation makes something, and you know that the phase 2 is on trade-related areas. So I think the pre-focus on trade in goods agenda does not help us, and does not help us to deal with, and I think most people have said those problems that are not necessary to be solved by a trade in goods tariff agenda. And maybe that is a lesson for the Continental FTA, I don't know.
Trudi.
So Anton's hand. Gerhard, go ahead.
I just want to ask Paul, or ask rhetorically, do we need a new round of negotiations on a Continental FTA to address the priority issues, to address customs issues, trade facilitation issues? Is that what we need? What will be the outcome of that? Well, it seems to me that will be one issue that must be on the agenda of a Continental FTA, but what else should be there in order to make a difference? If the implication here is, listen to what Paul is saying, even if we reach an agreement on the market access, on the goods part, it will not result in much immediate effect unless, he says, we deal with all those other priorities, the rules of origin, the technical barriers to trade, the issues at the border. And I would like to add, well, we can reach a lot, we can have a lot of additional benefit if we can consolidate and implement what we have already agreed upon in these areas in the existing regs.
Anton?
Thank you, Trudi. I just want to add to what Paul has said about why it has taken so long. The fundamental reason is that the 26 members, they were not of the same understanding of how this process will unfold. And as a result, when we then start to discuss modalities and the principles underlining the FTA, member states had different views. The first issue that they grappled with was, this is REC negotiations. In other words, there will be 3 RECs. In other words, the 3 RECs will negotiate with each other in a REC context. It took quite a long time for the tripartite membership to get to a point where they understood that it's not going to be possible to have REC negotiations in the way they see it. Originally, the aim was, the way I see it, is that it would have been like a political agreement. It would have been a paper agreement where you take the trade liberalization in each REC, what has been agreed in each REC, and on paper just transpose that, extend it to the other RECs. You can do it theoretically, as a theoretical exercise, and then politically sign off on it. That would have been the first prize. You can do it very quickly. But that approach was not agreed to by all members, and eventually the strong members in the group that was not in favor of that approach negotiated different modalities, which brought us to where we are now, where we've basically got bilateral trade negotiations between customs territories. That took a very long time. So basically what we have is a situation now where we've got just normal bilateral trade negotiations. The RECs themselves have really very little role to play apart from coordinating the process. And yes, as a result, we will end up with a fragmented free trade area with a lot of different bilateral trade agreements. Now the question of the additional areas now becomes very critical. If you look at the other pillars of the agreement, does it now make sense to still continue with them in the same manner? How, if you take services, for example, which is one of the pillars that we will start negotiations, can you do that collectively? If you take SACU as an example, services is not even part of the SACU agreement. So what would be the common basis for SACU to negotiate services under the tripartite? You have a common basis for goods because you've got a customs union, a common external tariff, maybe some policies that are harmonized. On services, you've got nothing. So how will you negotiate services in a REC context? It by default will become even more fragmented approach where member states are at will to negotiate or not negotiate. The ambition will be different, etc. The question on the Continental FTA, and Batanai is here, you can also support on that. I think it was 2 years ago when we were at the African Union retreat, which the Honorable Mr. Mwensha called, and he invited all the RECs on the African continent. And we brainstormed this notion of a continental FTA at a very nice resort in Ethiopia. And in the end, after all the discussions, where we had quite strong interventions from ECOWAS, where they were not in favor of this at the time, saying that we are just too different. We've got our own paths of development and integration, which we are focusing on. So for the immediate future, that is out of the picture to go for a continental FTA. The eventual outcome was that we will use the tripartite as the entry point. Everybody is looking towards the tripartite. If we can get it right, then they will get back together to the drawing board and consider, okay, now how to move towards the continental FTA. So basically the ball is in the tripartite's court. If we can get it right, we can serve as a basis to deepen continental integration. If we cannot get it right, I think we go back to the drawing board. And currently the way it has evolved is that we will end up with a fragmented trade regime with a lot of bilaterals, which will be totally different. Trade barriers will remain, border control will remain, because we will not have a common external tariff, so to speak. And we will not be able to just transpose that into a continental FTA.
Yeah, but my problem on that point, thank you for a very lucid and useful background sketch there, Anton. But the logical disjoint here is the tripart is not designed, and it is not the job of the tripart negotiators to build a foundation for the continental FTA. That is not its task. That is not its job. It is not designed to do so, and it is not pursuing that objective. So then to turn around at the later point and say, okay, now we're going to use this thing, which is designed for something else, to be the starting point, the entry point, the building block for the continental FTA. Well, that is logically not a defensible argument. Malcolm.
Yeah, my contribution on this. I think that you were hinting at trying to bring in something other than goods into the initial negotiating dimension, and that is a novel way of approaching both the timing of trade negotiations and also the allocation of resources within the negotiating teams, because I think one important thing from my experience as an expert on services is that most government trade policy departments organize around goods, mainly because I think that negotiations on goods tend to be self-contained within trade policy teams, whereas, as you know, services involves regulatory reform and a whole load of other ministries. So if the idea to introduce a new negotiation style were to emerge, putting more focus on services, in fact, I think actually what you would probably find is that you still have small teams because nobody really understands services, not very much, that's my experience. We're a niche, we're niche players actually, those that know about this. So the rest of the trade policy teams will be not doing anything until the new phase when goods comes round actually brings them back into play. So I think I can always see goods coming first because, generally speaking, people understand it in trade teams, whereas they don't understand services. So I think it's one thing. The second thing I would say is that, when two countries negotiate to remove barriers to trade in services, that's what I'm going to be talking about for this intervention, you end up with bilateral agreements like bilateral transport agreements, but that's not really done at a regional level. And what you will end up with, even with what we're doing now at the SADC level and probably at the tripartite level, is a whole, you have a regional approach, which is an encompassing through MFN of essentially bilateral market access arrangements. To truly achieve regional integration in trade in services, you need to jump past the FTA level and move into what we called in Europe the single market, because the single market then results in a completely regional regulatory framework for individual sectors, which then gets implemented at the national level and maybe then locked in through trade agreements as a kind of both transparency and an anti-regression arrangement, just as we've had in the GATS. And I think that's probably why most countries will continue to put goods first, because they know more about it and it's easier to manage.
Thank you for that very important reminder. I don't think Trudi is saying we must start with trade and services. Trudi is not saying that. She still has to tell us what she's saying. But Anton is also quite right, and he's just reminded us, we haven't got consolidated positions in trade and services. That's another reason why we can't jump in with a typical GATS-based trade and services. That is not the idea, not at all. No. That will bring us nowhere. As a matter of fact, it's a non-starter, as Anton has said. So that is
very quickly come in on that. Malcolm, what I'm thinking, and I'm not a services expert, but my practical thinking through the problem is we're building a lot of roads and other transport infrastructure in the region. There are a lot of regulations associated with the use of that transport infrastructure that are in fact manifesting as NTBs. And you mentioned yesterday, and that's one of my favorite examples, is the axle load limits that differ from one country to the next. My entry point into the services agenda is not a trade and services agenda with market access and liberalization, but it's to look at those bottlenecks, those regulatory constraints that are associated with use of the transport services. And I would say, let's park the trade liberalization as far as services is concerned, because you will find the challenges that Anton and you are outlining, but rather almost develop a transport infrastructure services strategy for the region. And that doesn't tread on toes as far as market access is concerned. And part of the reason why I say that is if we look practically at the area of services and we look at those modes of supply, in terms of the GATS, and I stand under correction, JB and others can help me here, it seems to me that the studies, particularly in the WTO, indicate that a lot of the benefits associated with trade and services liberalization come via mode 3. That's foreign direct investment. Now the irony is, as far as trade and services mode 3 is concerned, seems to me you don't actually need a preferential arrangement to find, for example, South African services suppliers, telecoms, distribution services, wholesale, retail, financial, actually getting market access without the agreements. So why would we start with something which, to be honest, is perhaps not such a big issue? But for me, it's coming back to the private sector approach. What are the problems we face? You've got a container with X tons, you come to the border, and the next axle load limit is X minus 10 tons. What do you do with the 10 tons? Let's solve those practical issues. As far as the trade and goods agenda is concerned, it seems to me that the rules of origin are perhaps one of the key issues that causes challenges in terms of effectively realizing the benefits of integration. You can liberalize trade in terms of tariffs, but if you've got restrictive rules of origin, Eckhart, you can help us here, then to be honest, that liberalization comes to naught. Let's look at those issues. So it's really looking at a very practical agenda to say, you know what, there's some aspects of the trade and goods agenda. Please no tariff liberalization immediately in the negotiations. But there are other aspects of that agenda. That's where your trade facilitation agenda comes in too. Some aspects of a services, not services liberalization agenda, that are really, really important if we're going to make the infrastructure work. This can come together as perhaps a less contentious agenda. The problem you raise about our negotiators, this is a very, very practical problem. They've got a vested interest. We have superb negotiators on tariff liberalization in all of our countries. Lots of experience, as Paul indicates, in the WTO. This is where they want the action. And as senior officials in all of our government departments, they enjoy a lot of policy space and policy power. They have an interest in that agenda. Let's be very frank about that. But as Paul has reminded us, that's not where the benefits are going to come from. So why would we paint ourselves into another corner, in this case at a continental level? And Gerhard, we can perhaps conclude with a comment about the Pan-Africanism and the Nigerian
Buttoneye is
issues.
desperately trying to give us the ultimate wisdom and insight that we've all been waiting for, straight from others.
Buttoneye.
I wish I could do that, Prof, but...
well, give it a try.
Yeah, so maybe to reconcile what Anton said and what eventually happened at the summit was that when heads of states looked at what was happening in the continent, the whole narrative about Africa rising, the whole narrative about structural transformation, they thought that trade would come in and be a useful lever in that direction, and then gave the directives for the establishment of the CFTA. And we are all cognizant of the fact that in most times it is actually us experts who then go back to police organ meetings and tell them it's impossible. So these are some of the things that we are aware of, and now a lot of things have happened between the time the 2008 decision on the tripartite was made and today.
Yes.
And we have seen the technical developments that have happened in terms of articulating what the core principles that were supposed to guide the tripartite process negotiations. So the question we are asking ourselves today is, does it still provide a good basis to start a discussion for the CFTA? A legitimate question that should be answered at the technical level, and it's some of the work that we are working on. Now, does it make sense to be talking about the CFTA at this level? Talking to private sector people, they give us indications that it actually does make sense, because they tell us when they export to other African countries, for example, in Africa, South African trader exporting to Nigeria, they face higher levels of tariff protection as compared to as they export to EU or the US. And they think that there is a legitimate case for a framework that allows tariffs between these countries to go down. They think that once that framework is in place, it should be adequate enough to provide for dispute settlement. It should be adequate enough to provide for the flows of investments across borders. So what is such a framework? For us, it was very clear that could be achieved in the form of a continental free trade area. And the whole discussion, probably coming to philosophical and abstract issues, the whole discussion about Africa rising narrative and the importance of positioning the continent to benefit from that rising now. We all know what's going to happen to our GDP growth. We all know what's going to happen to household incomes. And do we just sit around today and hope that things are going to be triggered automatically. We all know the developments at the global level, the US negotiating with the EU, the US negotiating with Asian countries, setting global standards. Are we just supposed to be observers to that process when they then negotiate these things outside the WTO and then at a later stage bring them and define global standards for us while we are just sitting down there and looking? So it's not a simple discussion as some of us may want to take it. It's a complicated discussion. And what basis do you have to talk about a continental free trade area with a reg like ACAS that is 1.5 intra-ACAS trade? What really are you talking about? So remember, the heads of states were aware of these things. That's why they did not just peddle a model that speaks to market integration. Then the PIAT clusters, the Boosting Intra-African Trade Action Plan clusters that speak to the importance of building productive capacity, the importance of building infrastructure, as some of the constraints that we face in facilitating even intra-regional trade at COMESA level, at ACAS level. So from where we sit, again, we see an attempt to look at regional integration from a developmental perspective. And it is important that this perspective should be embraced at the national level so that there is some marrying of the objectives at the three levels: national level, regional level, and the continental level. And it's also important to ensure that when we discuss about embracing a developmental state at the national level, whatever we do does not then militate against our regional and continental integration objective. So again, it's something very complicated, very easy to talk about, but as you said with your experience on the border, not so easy to get done in practical terms. Thank you.
Thank you very much, But and I, as far as I'm concerned, Trudi will have the final word, as it should be. I want to take the implications of what we've just heard as sort of the concluding anchor for my contribution to this debate. What But and I has told us now is very important for the political and practical implications that are contained in what he's saying there. And I would actually I would like to invite you, ladies and gentlemen, from others, from the African Union Commission, to at some point to consider to write up the basic philosophy, the basic objective that you have now started to explain to us, and we'll publish it. That debate about these issues should not be confined to this room and to others, etc., and even to retreats. So that is a legitimating invitation or consequence that I want to suggest to you. Secondly, I want to now formally arrive. I want to put myself in the station manager, railway station manager role. I want to ring a bell and announce to you that the Continental FTA has arrived. I'm not sarcastic. I'm saying this having listened carefully, as I most times, not always, and most times try to do. There's a very important message in what I've heard from But and I, and that is, it is the vocabulary of the moment. We've got mega debates outside there, the transatlantic one, the Pacific one. This is going to be our mega debate. This is opportune. It is Africa rising. It is the right time. We can't wait. Now, those are important political messages. I personally don't think that can save and direct the technicalities of a trade agreement, but that is politically very, very significant. So the Continental FTA, ladies and gentlemen, ting-a-ling-a-ling, has arrived. From now on, it's all systems go. And you know what? And Trudi can confirm that. There's a lot of international interest and keenness and support and money bags being cling-a-linged around for this effort. So we are into exciting times for the next couple of years. And the entourage sitting here in front, with the exception of Eckhart. Maybe you'll join them. But they are in the steering wheel already there in others about these things. So the political significance of this package should not be underestimated. I wish them all the luck in the world with, no, I'm serious. This is something that is exciting in terms of political aims. It is daunting in terms of doing that for 53 countries, where the biggest, the wreck with the biggest economy on the continent, ECOWAS, seems to be not particularly keen. But they will solve that one. They will solve that one. But what I also want to emphasize is I want you to write up this because I want to hold you accountable to your promises that you will deal with these technical issues. Lower tariffs at the borders in Nigeria will not allow or will not be translated into a reaping of the benefits. So those additional challenges, the rules of origin, the TBTs, the technical stuff. The easy part may be the suggestion that it's now, there will be lower tariffs, which will be phased in over a considerable period of time. And by the way, the tariff harvest in the tripartite is extremely, extremely modest. 60%, what? What is it? 5% more liberation if you take what is already done. It's extremely modest. It's extremely modest. Okay, but no, you can't. This lady was before you. But those are guys that are very quick.
Yes.
Okay.
I just want to pick on what Martina said. To say that you are right to say that the agenda is now the...
Is it on this one? Okay, speak into the microphone. Thank you.
Okay. I was saying that you are right to say that the agenda now is Continental CFTA and boosting intra-African trade. And just to supplement what Martina has said, is what we are doing within the Africa Trade Policy Center, of course in collaboration with AUC and UNDP, is that we have piloted an initiative of boosting intra-African trade, and we have selected pilot countries and all the RECs to work with them to start off with some sensitization workshops on what we mean in terms of the Continental CFTA and boosting intra-African trade, which is, of course, the agenda that was given to us with our heads of states. And then from there, we are going to assist them with formulating the action plans for boosting intra-African.
Who will formulate action plans?
The member states and the RECs.
So the 53 members,
pilot selected countries and the RECs.
Okay, who are these pilots? Can you tell us?
Okay, what we did in the selection of the member countries, basically we look at the REC and the host REC country. So for Nigeria, for ECOWAS, we have Nigeria as the selected country. For SADC, of course, we have Botswana. For Djibouti, for IGAD, we have Djibouti. So we have all these countries, among other countries. Yes.
That's very, no, I'm listening, sorry.
Yeah, so we are starting the sensitization workshop with them, and then from there, we have actually hired consultants who will be working with these member countries and the RECs to develop their action plans, where they will pick up priority sectors within their countries. Which sector do we want to develop in terms of boosting intra-African trade? And then, of course, in the action plan for the CFTA. So all these are platforms that are being set up to go to the, to the agenda that we're looking forward to, the BIT and CFTA. So we are doing that also, and I just want to let the meeting know that.
That's very important.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that. That is, listen, ladies and gentlemen, this is very interesting news. It's about a novel approach of a particular kind. Do you want to react to that, Paul? Because
when we were discussing competition yesterday, we have heard how the COMESA Treaty, when it was crafted, it created a framework for COMESA actually to address, say, competition issues later. So this type of agreements that we are negotiating, I just want to, we should also not have, what you call it, we should not have optimistic,
over-ambitious.
over-ambitious, but I don't want to say that. I want to say they create a framework for the future in engagement. That is also important. I think they create also a rules-based system where you can bring those issues that maybe Trudi is talking about in the future. So they are very important. They may not be, a Continental FTA may not be important a year later or 2 years later, but it's really the design as well. That
very valid.
If
very
they
true.
are forward-looking into providing a kind of a built-in agenda for the future from kind of a rules governance point of view, then they are very important.
That's
they may not be attractive
now.
That's
a very valid exercise.
But they are attractive in the future.
Very, very valid, very true, very true.
issue.
As a matter of fact, I've picked up from what Batanai has promised us. And let me just bring some of these elements together. There's this big, mega, politically sanctioned energy being unleashed for a discourse amongst African governments about the continent's trade and integration future, in general terms. It is legitimate. We won't stop it. We don't want to stop it. We want to support it. It's there. How it's going to pan out in terms of quality and sequencing and dates and objectives, when do you want to reach there? It seems to me they are not suggesting that in June 2019, although there are all sorts of dates, we will have a trade in goods agreement sewn up. Paul is introducing a very important concept here, which is about design. It is about the built-in agenda. That is how you take everyone forward. The challenge is, of course, you can't keep on debating and debating and debating. You must have outcomes at particular points, and that is where the challenge lies. But there was one particular notion suggested by Batanai that I'm very happy about, and that is why I want to make you accountable for what you promise here. And he said, he promised effective dispute resolution. He used the term dispute settlement. He did. Don't deny it now. I heard it.
Dispute settlement is actually part of what is being proposed now.
Effective dispute settlement.
Effective dispute settlement. But you know, it's also subject to member states. Yeah, now, yes, it's a union of states. So I was going to say, the Commission is not oblivious to the challenges that the CFTA brings in terms of process and in terms of substance. We are aware of the complexity that comes with bringing 54 member states in one room to
and the challenges for us, for you guys as officials, to suggest that wish list and then to translate it when it comes to what you're now reminding us, the realities of the governments.
Yes. Yeah. So it's something that we are already thinking about in terms of process-wise and the agenda. And coming out of the ministerial just a few weeks ago, you find there are member states that are just resonating with what Trudi was just saying. Do we have to start with goods? They are looking at services as an opportunity that the CFTA can actually bring to reality. And it comes to the issue that Paul is talking about. How do we design it in such a way that it addresses all the interests of the member states on the table? Some countries are saying, oh, let's be cautious. Let's start with what we know. And what we know is goods. And what we know is that these negotiators, especially those that have a very strong Geneva experience, are not very good with negotiating agreements that have a very strong regional integration component. And this speaks to the design of the architecture. How do we design these negotiations so that we don't play ball into systems that won't deliver? And early indications are that I would summarize, and if I was a Twitter enthusiast, I would just say CFTA, it's not tariffs as usual. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Batanai. I'd like to pick up from that, and Gerhard has just pointed to his watch to say that we're over time. So it is an opportunity to draw the conference to a close, but also to reflect on this extremely interesting discussion. And I'd like to pick up on Batanai's last intervention, which actually says that we can perhaps entertain an alternative approach to the Continental FTA. From my perspective, I firmly believe in regional integration in Africa. It makes a lot of sense. The fundamental question is, what is on that agenda? How do we implement that? And a very important point, that it be rules-based. This is important for transparency, predictability, certainty for all stakeholders. We've talked about the private sector. They really are the drivers of regional integration in many, many respects. They're responsible for the cross-border linkages in terms of economic activity. They create jobs. It's not governments that create jobs. So they are the partners to the developmental state. The developmental state is a concept that is permeating our discussion of a developmental regional integration agenda. But what is a developmental state? I'm not sure what the literature says, but for me, a developmental state is a competent state, a state that has the capacity to make, implement, monitor, evaluate, and assess the policies it makes, a state that is committed to long-term sustainable development, to global integration, to providing a better life for all citizens. How many developmental states do we have in Africa? This is work in progress. Can we use the regional integration agenda, the Continental FTA, to promote the development of these developmental states in our part of the world? The big question then is, what will that agenda be for Africa's integration, for Africa to claim the 21st century? And it's really good news that there are commitments at high political level to the Continental FTA and to aspects, very important aspects, of rules-based governance. This is essential in the 21st century. So we look forward to more work, debate, discussions, and engagement as this process unfolds. And I'd like to thank all of you very much for participating in this discussion. It's something that Tralac would like to continue working on. And as a small organization, we need partners. We want to work with you. We want to work with partners who are committed to this vision of a growing, rising Africa in the 21st century, who are prepared to take the risk of thinking out of the box, of promoting debates that are sometimes very, very uncomfortable, but to really take on board the realities of the challenges that our stakeholders face in the 21st century. So for those of you who are interested to work with us, individuals, organizations, please do contact us. We want to promote this vision for Africa's integration at the continental level. I would also like to announce, as I mentioned briefly yesterday, that Tralac's annual conference next year will not take place in Cape Town. We'll be moving to the region. And without preempting too much in terms of a promise of our location next year, we have had an offer from partners in Zambia. And this could be where we meet next year. And I look very much forward to that. So thank you very much, everyone. I would like to just remind you, please, to complete your evaluation forms. This is also where you can include suggestions for further work, debates, discussions. This is a debate that needs to continue. And it continues along different channels and different fora. And it will come together, hopefully, to an agenda which will promote development for all of us in Africa. Thank you very much.